Dear fellow INFJ.
There's a particular kind of silence that lives inside some people, a quiet, observant silence that contains stories, inner songs, long imaginings, and a lifetime of noticing. For INFJs, the rare, intuitive feeling personalities that often describe themselves as old souls, aging is not merely a passage of years, it is a deepening of something already profound. Today, we will explore what it means to be an INFJ senior citizen. We will weave personality, theory, and neuroscience, development, and lifespan psychology, and the lived reality of aging with sensitivity. We will ask, how does an INFJ's past shape their later years? What do they worry about? How do they experience loneliness and joy? What does research tell us about emotion, memory, and connection in older adults, especially those who are highly sensitive and intensely private? And finally, what practical steps help INFJs age with integrity rather than despair? This video is long and careful. It's for INFJs entering midlife or later, for their children and caregivers, and for anyone curious about how personality weaves into the aging brain. Part 1. So who is the INFJ? A quick orientation. Before we talk about aging, let's briefly restate what an INFJ typically is, not as a label of destiny, but as a descriptive pattern that shapes experience. INFJs tend to prefer introversion, to use intuition to see patterns and meaning, and to prioritize feeling, especially harmony, values, and the emotional states of others. Many INFJs also identify as highly sensitive. They notice subtle cues in faces, tone, and environments. This combination, deep pattern sensing with high emotional attunement, creates a person who often prefers solitude for reflection, who values authenticity, and who sees the inner life in vivid detail. These traits are not static. Personality research shows that traits have substantial stability across decades, but they also mature and adapt with life events. Meta-analyses summarize trait stability across the lifespan. That means the INFJ of age 70 will share fundamental ways of experiencing with their 30-year-old self, but life experience reshapes how those traits are expressed. Part 2. How the past shapes the later years: attachment, trauma, and repair. One of the most powerful ways the past influences the present is through patterns of attachment and early caregiving. Attachment theory from John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth onward shows that early relationships form internal working models of how closeness works. These patterns persist into adulthood. People who experience secure responsiveness as children tend to approach relationships with trust. People who experienced inconsistency may become anxious or avoidant in love. For many INFJs, who are innately tuned to emotional dynamics, early experiences can have outsized effects. A history of inconsistent caregiving, emotional neglect, or invalidation often teaches the INFJ to become hyper-attuned, to prioritize emotional vigilance, or to build carefully guarded inner worlds. These early templates show up again in later life, in how an INFJ trusts others, how they seek support, and how they interpret loss and aging. Research across decades shows that attachment patterns affect relationships, health behaviors, and even stress reactivity through life. Therapies that target attachment, emotionally focused. Therapy or other relational approaches can change these patterns in adulthood, meaning the past is influential but not deterministic. Part 3, the neuroscience of sensitivity and aging. What happens in the brain as a sensitive, introspective person ages? Let's look at several strands of neuroscience that are especially relevant to the INFJ profile. First, the mirror neuron and empathy systems. Research into mirror neurons, beginning with Rizzolatti and colleagues and expanded in reviews by Desity and others, links an empathic capacity to neural systems that simulate others' actions and emotions. In highly empathic people, overlapping with what Elaine Aron calls highly sensitive persons, HSPs, emotional stimuli can trigger more intense neural responses. A landmark fMRI study by Acevedo and colleagues in 2014 found that high sensory processing sensitivity, the HSP trait, related to stronger responses in brain regions tied to awareness and empathy when participants viewed emotional faces, especially when viewing their partner. This heightened neural responsiveness helps explain why sensitive people experience emotion more vividly across the lifespan. Second, the default mode network, the brain system engaged during self-generated thought, memory retrieval, and simulation of the future. Studies reviewed by Andrews Hanna and colleagues show the DMN underpins internal reflection, autobiographical memory, and imagining possibilities. INFJs, whose cognitive life often focuses on inner meaning and narrative, likely rely more heavily on DMN functions for making sense of experience. As people age, DMN connectivity changes, long-range connectivity often declines, and the balance between networks shifts. Abelaneda Perez and others summarize age-related changes in DMN connectivity that can influence how vividly we simulate the past and future. This doesn't mean elders lose meaning, rather it changes the texture of inner life and the ease of sustaining long, complex inner simulations. Third, aging interacts with emotional regulation. Psychologist Laura Carstenson's socioemotional selectivity theory, SST, shows that older adults prioritize emotionally meaningful goals and relationships more than younger adults do, often experiencing greater emotional stability and a positivity effect. Older adults attend to and remember positive information more readily. For INFJs, this tendency toward meaningful selection can amplify existing preferences. A senior INFJ may prune social circles even more intentionally, seeking fewer but deeper relationships. The cost is that if the INFJ has a small social network, its shrinkage with age can increase isolation risk. Part 4. Loneliness, Health, and the INFJ's Social World. Loneliness is one of the most critical public health issues in aging. Large meta-analyses and systematic reviews by Holt, Lundstad, and others found that social isolation and loneliness significantly increase mortality risk, effects comparable to smoking or obesity in magnitude. People with weaker social ties have higher odds of early death. For older adults, loneliness links to depression, cognitive decline, and physical illness. These findings matter intensely for INFJs, who often have smaller, selective social networks by preference. If a senior INFJ tight circle narrows further through loss, mobility issues, or conflict, the physiological costs of loneliness can be severe. Another recent line of research ties environmental factors to loneliness. Living in lonely-genic environments, urban spaces without green areas or social infrastructure, increases isolation risk. For INFJ seniors, creating a supportive, low-stimulus environment that enables occasional social contact, clubs, volunteer projects, green walks, matters not just emotionally, but physically. Part 5. Memory, Emotion, and the Weight of History. INFJs often say they don't forget how something felt. Neuroscience supports this. Emotional arousal during events enhances memory encoding via assessor amygdala-hippocampal interactions. Joseph Ledoux and others detailed how emotion gates memory consolidation. For an INFJ senior, decades of emotionally salient experiences create a dense, affect-laden autobiographical database. This is a source of wisdom, no, but it can also be a burden when older adults ruminate on regrets, grievances, or unresolved trauma. Research on aging suggests that while certain cognitive functions decline, processing speed, working memory, crystallized intelligence, knowledge, vocabulary, life wisdom, often remains stable or improves. That implies INFJ seniors can display remarkable insight and perspective. Yet, when trauma or unresolved grief is present, emotion-laden memories can trigger depressive loops or rumination. Nolan Hoeksema's research on rumination shows repetitive negative thought predicts longer depressive episodes. For the INFJ elder, the richness of emotional memory is a double-edged sword. Part 6, Identity, Purpose, and Erikson's Elder Task, Integrity versus Despair. Erikson's final psychosocial stage names the central task of old age: integrity versus despair. The core question becomes, have I lived a life that makes sense? Am I at peace with my choices? For the INFJ, whose life is often organized around meaning and service, this stage can be a time of extraordinary flowering or deep sorrow. Recent empirical work exploring ego integrity ties this sense to well-being and resilience in old age. A 2021 study by Vanderkop Dieter and colleagues examined sources of resilience and found that ego integrity strongly relates to mental health in older adults. Conversely, despair predicts depressive symptoms. For INFJs, who often keep inner lives private, the risk is that unresolved regrets remain unspoken, increasing the chance of despair unless the individual engages in life review, narrative reconstruction, or generative acts that pass meaning to others. Part 7, Creativity, Generativity, and Legacy, INFJ's later gifts. Many INFJs experience late-life creativity and generativity. Erikson's earlier stage of generativity, cited the desire to guide the next generation, often matures into legacy projects in old age: memoirs, mentorships, art, or community work. Research on aging and creativity shows that older adults can produce deeply meaningful creative work, especially when motivated by life purpose and social contribution. For INFJs, their gift for seeing deep patterns and meaning translates naturally into mentorship roles, clergy, writing, or quietly advising close friends and family. Practical studies on post-traumatic growth and meaning-making indicate that people who synthesize suffering into narrative often report higher well-being. For INFJ seniors who faced adversity in earlier life, turning trials into teachings can be a potent path toward integrity. This is not platitude. Empirically, meaning-centered therapies and life review interventions reduce depressive symptoms in older adults and increase life satisfaction. Part 8, Common Struggles for INFJ Seniors, What They Report. Drawing from clinical literature and first-person accounts, several recurrent struggles emerge for INFJ elders. 1. Compounding isolation, INFJs often trimmed their social circles by preference. With age-related losses, friends dying, mobility declining, that small network can shrink dangerously. Loneliness then magnifies vulnerability. See Holt-Lundstad and recent meta-analyses. 2. Grief over unsaid things. Many INFJs regret not having said key things: apologies, affirmations, life narratives. This unfinished business can cause rumination and haunt elder years. Life review therapy and narrative interventions help here, empirically supported. 3. Sensitivity to overstimulation. As sensory processing changes, environments that are too loud, bright, or crowded can be physiologically taxing. Research on HSP and SPS, sensory processing sensitivity, shows greater neural reactivity to stimuli, and this persists across adulthood. 4. Health anxiety and body changes. INFJ's inward focus sometimes magnifies health anxieties. While vigilance can be adaptive, catastrophizing can produce stress that worsens health outcomes. CBT and acceptance-based approaches reduce health anxiety in older adults. 5. Struggling with modernity and social change. Many INFJs grew up in different social rhythms. Rapid technological and cultural change can feel alienating, increasing feelings of disconnection from younger generations unless the elder actively builds bridges. Part 9. How past traumas show up in old age. Research view. Decades-old trauma does not vanish with time. Studies of late-life PTSD and trauma note that aging can reactivate traumatic memories, particularly during retirement, bereavement, or health crises, because the structures that once occupied daily life recede, leaving space for unresolved memories to resurface. Cohort research shows people with adverse childhood experiences have higher risks for chronic illness, depressive symptoms, and social difficulties in later life. But importantly, interventions remain effective. Trauma-informed therapy adapted for older adults, life review therapy, and community support programs reduce symptoms and improve functioning. The past matters, but it can be worked with, even late in life. Part 10, Practical Evidence-Based Strategies for INFJ Seniors, Actionable Guidance. Let's move into actionable steps. Here is your concise guide. First, launch a small meaning project. Choose one thing, a memoir, mentoring, and break it into tiny, weekly steps. Research shows this builds legacy and fights despair. Protect your energy by building low-stimulus social rituals. A short, scheduled walk with a trusted friend in a quiet park can fulfill your need for connection without the drain. Weave your story together. Try a nightly journal or a life map timeline. Studies prove reviewing your life this way reduces depression and helps you find the golden threads of your journey. Guard against isolation by cultivating loose ties. Join a weekly club or group. Science tells us these casual connections are a surprising key to longevity and well-being. Practice bounded empathy. Learn to say, I see you're struggling. What would help? Setting these limits is proven to prevent the burnout that comes from feeling too much. Remember the profound link between body and mind. A daily walk, a good night's sleep. These simple acts are your foundation, building cognitive reserve and protecting your mental health. Consider finding a therapist or group specialized in elder support. These communities are powerful, proven tools to reduce loneliness. And finally, each night, name 3 small, meaningful moments. Intentionally cultivating gratitude amplifies the natural positivity bias of the aging brain, directly boosting your joy. Aging is, for an INFJ, a prolonged invitation to bring inner life into the light, to translate wisdom into story, to select relationships that matter, and to tend a life that feels honest to the soul. Neuroscience, lifespan psychology, and public health all remind us that social connection and meaningful activity shape outcomes in old age. But so does courage. The courage to say what matters, to seek help for what hurts, and to share gifts with the next generation. If you are an INFJ entering your later years, do not treat your sensitivity as a liability. Treat it as the compass it is.